Hi guys, I'm Matthew Palumbo. I'm the national trainer for AudioControl. If you've been doing this with us every week, you've already known me a little bit or recognized my glowing, smiling face today. So it's another beautiful, cloudy, rainy day here in the Pacific Northwest. So thanks for joining us today. For those of you that this is maybe your first week or something along those lines, we do these every Thursday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. They run about an hour, and we cover a different topic every week. So again, if this is your first time joining us, thank you. If you've been with us every week, even better. I really appreciate that. So the same thing that I ask pretty much every week is, what do you want to see in these trainings? What topic would you like to learn more about? Is there a specific piece of equipment? Is there, what is it? What do you want to see? So definitely send me an email, leave me a Facebook message. If you've got my info, shoot me a text, whatever. Send me a message of some sort, you guys. Let me know what it is that you'd like to be trained on, and we'll do it if we can. So with that, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about the software side of audio control. So Chris and I, have been doing trainings obviously for a while, him longer than I. And I think the biggest thing that a lot of people sometimes kind of gloss over or miss or are confused about sometimes is the different softwares. And I think part of that is, with our DSP products, they have some features built in that sometimes get confused. And here's what I mean by that. So we have three main apps, three apps, period, that we use for mobile audio. We have the DM Control app, the DM RTA, and the DM Smart DSP. So DM Control is an app that is used for basically consumer control of D-series products. So by D-series product, that means DM608, DM810 DSPs, and then the D6.1200 amplifier. Basically the products with an option port that are DSP based, soon to be the D4800 as well. For those of you that don't know, the D4800 came out before the option port was on there. Those are going to very soon change over to having an option port. So if you've been wanting to do something like that, that will happen in the near future. So the different apps that we've got here. So the DM Control app is one that I think a lot of folks probably haven't heard of yet, or if you've been in one of my trainings, I usually mention it. Some of you have never even heard of such a thing, never seen DM Control before. That's the most recent one, and we're going to dive a little bit more into that in a second. But when I say that things get confused sometimes, here's what I mean. The DM RTA app is specifically for controlling and using the DM RTA test tool, right? So this guy here, this test tool, that's what the DM RTA app is for. It's for running that. The DM Smart DSP app is for controlling and setting up and tuning D-series product, like a DM608, a DM810, D4800, D6.1200 amplifiers. All of those things are ran with the DM Smart DSP. Where I think a lot of people get sometimes confused or wrapped up or misled is that when you get into the DM Smart DSP app, which we're going to show in a little bit, there's an RTA built into that. And so a lot of guys look at it and go, oh, cool, DM RTA. It's not the same thing, okay? DM Smart DSP has an RTA built into the amplifier or into the DSP on the input side, but it's not the same thing as having a DM RTA and using the DM RTA app. You do not use the DM RTA app and then hook up to your amplifier and now you have an RTA in your car, okay? It's not like that. It's a little bit different. So we're gonna dive into all the different apps separately and spend a little bit of time on each just to kind of show you guys the ins and outs, maybe some tips and tricks on things you haven't seen yet or didn't know that it did, that sort of thing. So with that, let's jump in. We're gonna start with the DM Control app. And like Chris said earlier, if you guys have questions or have something specific, feel free to use the chat. And Chris is over here kind of monitoring that and helping with questions and stuff. He'll jump in throughout the training as well and help with some input and stuff like that. So the DM Control app is pretty slick. This is something we came up with to be a consumer-focused app. So this is something for your customers or for consumers directly. This is an app they can put on their smartphone. And basically what it does is it allows them to do what our ACR3 physical controller would do from their smartphone. So here's what that looks like, okay? The app itself is pretty slick. If you can see that on my phone, it's pretty clean, pretty simple. It looks really, really nice. And on that app, there are 4 little presets down here at the bottom. You've got your 4 memory presets. What these are the same 4 presets that you have in the DM Smart DSP software. So when you go in and you set up that amplifier or DSP and you do all of your tunes and you've saved them to those 4 different presets, the ACR3 level controller, the bass knob or dash control level, dash mounted control knob, whatever you want to call it, allows you to switch between those 4 presets. But some customers are unclear on how to do that, or maybe they don't want a physical controller mounted at the front of their car. This is a great way that they can do that wirelessly, and it gives them a visual aspect to it, okay? The ACR3 level controller will flash its LEDs and show you which preset you're on, but if you didn't see the lights flash when you were switching through, and some of you will be nodding your heads and know what I'm talking about here, you may not understand quite which preset, which one you're on, especially if you did it a few minutes ago, you don't remember, what have you. This is gonna highlight each one as you go through them. So you're gonna be able to see what those presets are. You can also name them from here. So if you want to have a preset for mom and dad, or single seat and 2 seat and all seat, or whatever it is that you want to have on there, you can do that. You also have this great big knob in the middle of the app. The knob is pretty cool. This is either going to be your master volume level, or it's going to be your sub control, depending on what you set up in the DSP. So here's the cool thing, you guys. This does not allow the end user to get into a bunch of advanced features. So you're not going to get in and screw up a tune. They're not going to get in there and start messing up time correction or screw up crossovers or anything like that, because it doesn't have all of those other features. It's basically just the things you'd want to do while driving down the road listening to the product. Okay, we don't need to access DM Smart DSP while we're cruising down the road, right? We don't need to be doing crossover adjustments while running down the road. What we might need to do, though, is turn up the subwoofer a little bit, or change presets on the DSP or something like that. So that was the big idea with this. The other thing that we want to try to make this do in the future, and I can't promise that this will happen, would be, it would be really, really cool if Apple will allow this to work through CarPlay one day. And that's a big maybe, right? There's a lot of other things that depend on that to make that happen. But if that could happen, imagine how cool that would be. You're in a, whatever, Honda, BMW, Hyundai, whatever it is that has CarPlay from the factory, you plug in or Bluetooth your phone for CarPlay, and in your CarPlay screen, you've got an AudioControl app that now has DSP control and a sub level or master volume level in there. It would be pretty slick if that's something that can happen. Like I said, no promises on that. That's kind of a, something cool that we would like to happen and are working on, but nothing slated for right now. There's a lot of moving pieces to that to make that happen. So to be totally clear with the DM control, to make this work with any of those products, any of the D series products that it's compatible with, it has to be a product that has the option port. And so the option port is where you're going to plug in your AC-BT24. So anything that we talk about today, you guys, that uses any sort of wireless or Bluetooth control, this is the piece that's key to that. It's AC-BT24. This is the little Bluetooth option module that plugs into the option port. So say you've got a DM608 processor like this, okay, and you've already plugged in via USB, you've done all the setup, you've done all the tuning, but now you want to allow the consumer to have control over DSP presets, let's say. All you've got to do is have a BT24, plug it into the option port itself, and now you're ready to go, okay? Now they can connect to it and get those basic controls on there. So that talks a little bit about DM control, what that is, and why we brought that out. And like I said, it's essentially, if you want to think of it as just something easy, it's an ACR3 on your phone, okay? That's the easiest way to think of it. That's how I remember it. It's an ACR3 on your phone. It's a visual ACR3. That's a really easy way to think of that. So the only product that currently won't work with in the D lineup is going to be the D4.800, because right now your D4.800 is not going to have an option port on here, okay? It was a pretty compact chassis when this amplifier came out, and there isn't an option port on there. We've made the revision to that one to add the option port, and we should start seeing those sometime, probably a month or so, something like that. So figure maybe early summer is when you'll see it in stores, maybe even sooner. So that'll be really, really cool, you guys. If you've already been selling the D4.800, the D6.1200, the DM608, the DM810, and you look at them all and go, hey, how come one of them doesn't have the option port? Now it will. So now everything that starts with a D in the audio control lineup in mobile audio will all have an option port and accept that ACBT24. So hopefully that makes that clear.
One of the very cool things about the control app is the ability that we're to update it. So there are a lot of things beyond just wanting to have a CarPlay long term that we're working on. A bunch of stuff from dynamic and global equalization to giving end users the ability to go in and do some cool stuff. Like bass, treble, balance, fader control, stuff like that. So long term, the DM Control app is going to be something that is going to be changed out, and we're going to be updating it regularly, just like our regular software platforms. So like I had said, when we get to the actual showing you guys stuff, even today's updates add some more features and functions into the DM Smart app, which we can show you guys physically how to go in and manipulate that. So we're getting lots of questions, and that's great. So when we get to that section, a lot of these questions we'll be going over. So once we get to showing the software side of the controller app, not the controller app, because the controller app is just on our phones. We'd have to hold our phones up like that and show you guys. But on our PCs, we are connected. So for Box Boys, what app is that? It's the DM Control app.
So just CTRL, DM-CTRL, and it's available in the App Store. It's available in the Android Play Store, or whatever, Google Play Store, whatever they call it on the Android. And it's a free app. You can download it. It'll work with the product you have right now, as long as everything's up to date and set up properly. So to be clear too, you do not have to do any sort of special setup to make the Control app work with the product. Okay, you don't have to go into DM Smart DSP and tell it, hey, my customer is going to use DM Control. You don't have to do anything like that. Okay, once you plug in the ACBT24, you get the little yellow flashing light. On the BT24, there are two little lights on here. There's a blue one and a yellow one. Once the little yellow light starts flashing, which is usually within a few seconds, you can launch that DM Control app. It'll pop up and say, hey, do you want to connect to this device? And away you go. Pretty straightforward.
And on like an Apple phone, you can see here. So if you just go to the store and you do a search for AudioControl, you can see that there are a bunch of different apps available at the store right now for AudioControl. So just do a search for AudioControl. You'll see as we're talking through all this stuff, we're just touching on the controller app since we can't share that now, and then we'll get into the more of the software side and working through that software here shortly. So
yeah, so for those of you that didn't see it, I just put it back up on the screen. There are three AudioControl apps. The DM Control app is specifically for mobile devices. DM RTA and DM Smart DSP can be used on mobile devices or on Mac and PC platforms. So if you want to follow along with us as we're going through this, that's a great idea. Go into your App Store right now, or go into your Google Play Store, whatever, and you can download these apps even without the product on your test bench or in your hands, and you can kind of follow along with us. Obviously, it's not the same thing as being plugged in, but you can at least kind of get a feel for some of the software. If you're new to this, or you've done one or two and kind of fumbled your way through it, feel free to pull this up on your computer and split screen me, or minimize us and listen, or whatever it is that you want to do. But it'd be a cool way to go through this kind of with us at the same time. So if you want to take a moment and do that now, that would be a good idea. You can split screen most computers and have us on one side and then the app running in demo mode on the other, and just kind of follow along. So we talked a little bit about the DM Control app. Again, that's the consumer-focused app. That is for wirelessly controlling the DM products and D-series amplifiers. That is going to allow ACR3 type control from a smartphone, from a mobile device. So moving on to the DM RTA, that's the next one that we're going to talk about. The DM RTA is, the app is used to just kind of run and use our testing tool, the DM RTA itself, which is this piece here for those of you that aren't familiar. The DM RTA is our ultimate test tool. We're going to go through the software in just a minute, and I'll show you what that stuff looks like. And then the other one that we're going to talk about is the DM Smart DSP app. Again, for those of you that aren't familiar, this is used to set up and tune all of our D-series products. So our D 4.800 multi-channel amp, D6.1200 6-channel amplifier, and then the DM608 and DM810 DSPs. That app is going to be used to set up, tune, control, whatever you want to say, for all of those products. So again, another thing that some of you may not already know is that all of our apps and all of our software is multi-platform compatible. So if you're going to run this on an Android phone or an iPhone, that's fine. It's going to look the same. It's going to work the same. You can run it on an Android tablet or an iPad. It's going to look and work the same. You can run it on a Mac or a PC, laptop, desktop. It really doesn't matter. The cool thing about our software is that it always looks the same. All it does is really scale for size, which is handy. So if you have, two different technicians in your shop, one's using an iPad and one's using a PC laptop, they're going to see the same screens. They're going to have the same options when they tune a DSP or use the DM-RTA. It doesn't lock you out of anything just because you're on a smaller screen or anything like that. The other side of that too, one thing I will mention on that as far as cross platforms, there are a couple of things that just from experience don't work, and that is the Google Chromebooks. A lot of times dealers will ask me, hey, I'm going to buy an inexpensive laptop for my shop so that my guys can use the DM-RTA so that they can set up DSPs reliably. It's a great idea. You can get an inexpensive laptop these days for a couple $100. Less than you'll spend on a nice drill. You could go get a laptop for your shop, and you should if you haven't. But don't buy a Chromebook. I know it's going to be the cheapest one there. I know that you can go get a Chromebook for 150, 200 bucks. And I have nothing against Chromebooks, but they don't run traditional Windows software or Mac software. So it's not going to run our apps. It needs to be a Windows-based PC. Those Chromebooks run their own kind of Chrome OS, whatever it is. So that's just a word to the wise. If you're going to go out and go shopping for an inexpensive laptop for the shop, you can still get a $200 or $300 laptop. Just make sure it's not a Chromebook. Make sure it runs Windows 10 or Mac OS. So I kind of went over the 3 different apps and what they do, the basics of what those 3 do. We're going to dive into each one here a little bit deeper in a moment. And then this is just a reminder that you do need the BT24 ACBT24 to communicate wirelessly with any of these products, okay? Anything when we talk about communicating via Bluetooth or using an app on a smart device, tablet or a smartphone, you're gonna need the ACBT24, okay? These devices do not have Bluetooth natively built into them. You do need the BT24 plugged into the option port in order to accommodate that, okay? So that's another thing that we should maybe cover before we dive into this deeper is with the different products. If you're going to use Bluetooth, you are going to be on a smartphone or tablet, okay? You cannot use Bluetooth to communicate to a laptop. If you're going to set up and tune and dial in these products with a laptop, that's great, but you're going to use a USB cable, okay? So there's a distinction there between the two. So a lot of times guys will get the BT24, they plug it in, they go to their laptop, pull up their Bluetooth options and start pairing to it, and it will allow you to pair. If you go to your options on your laptop and go to Bluetooth, it will find this and it will allow you to pair to it, but you're paired to it for streaming audio. You are not paired to it for control. So that's one of those little things that sometimes guys just miss in the trainings or they didn't quite understand. So something to just kind of be aware of is that if you're going to use a laptop or a desktop, it's going to be via USB, no matter the platform. If it's going to be on a smartphone or a tablet, it's going to be via Bluetooth, okay?
One of the other very important things about the DM Control app and connecting wirelessly is that in order to do updates to your firmware on any D61200, DM810, DM608, any of those products, is that you will have to be hardwired in order to do firmware updates, which we will go over here. Mm-hmm. It's very important to make sure that you have the latest revision of the software firmware on the units themselves in order for the ACBT24 to work. So say you bought a DM608, 8 months ago, and you had it installed, and then you're like, hey, I'm ready to go Bluetooth, and you go and you take the ACBT24, plug it in. Well, that firmware is probably an old firmware, and when you open up the app, it might not want to connect immediately because you will have to do a software firmware update. So always, we've mentioned this pretty much in every training that we've done. Yep. What you want to do is on your laptop, make sure you go through and delete off any DM software. So the Smart app, make sure you delete that. Go to the website, get the latest, plug that into your product. It's going to say that there's an update available, do the update, and then when you restart that product after the firmware update and you have the ACBT24 in, both LEDs on the ACBT24 are going to be flashing. Then when you open the app, you'll be able to connect. So it's always a matter of making sure that the software firmware is always up to date.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you have a 3-year-old product and you're constantly doing revisions to make sure that we have the latest technology on there, you're going to want to go through and do those updates. So right before we started this training, we did an update like on my computer, and instantly the ACBT24 connected. So we're going to dive right into that stuff. We'll show you how to do your updates, make sure that you guys are properly doing your updates, and we'll go from there.
Yep. And that was actually one of the next things I was going to bring up, is if you're having any sort of problems with connectivity, passing audio, some sort of weird glitch or settings not saving, or any of those weird little things that can happen with software-based products sometimes, I would say 99% of the time, the answer is a firmware update. And so, you know, whenever I help out with tech support calls and it's something related to a software-based product like the ones we're talking about today, I would say the answer is 99% of the time, update the firmware or make sure you have the latest software. So keep in mind too, you know, your phone and tablets and things are constantly updating themselves, right? The apps are always being refreshed and updated, and most of the time you don't even know it happens. I mean, mine does it at night while I'm asleep. I just wake up in the morning and there's a fresh app installed, right? But your products in your car obviously aren't going to do that. So you're going to need sometimes to go back in and possibly do that, especially if you're having some sort of connectivity issues or something along those lines. So let's get into the actual softwares themselves. We're going to start with going into the DM-RTA software. And one of the first things I want to do before we actually even dive into the software, you guys, is I want to cover something that I've covered in one of our trainings before, but I still get asked. I mean, I just got asked it this morning on a cell phone call. And that is, you know, we talk about the DM-RTA and we talk about all of its inputs and outputs. But one of the things that I get asked a lot is, it has this USB drive on the front of it, or this USB port, and okay, that's not the one that I use to control it. What's that for, right? So what I'm talking about here is when you're looking at the DM-RTA, there are 2 USB ports. There's one on top of the product right here, which is like a USB-B, as in boy, okay? That's the port that we use to actually control the DM-RTA. But then there's also one on the front of the product here that looks more like a traditional just USB port. Looks like a regular male USB or female USB. So what you do on this is, a lot of guys will ask me, okay, well, how do I use that USB? What's that for? Well, that USB can be used to put out things like test tones, sine wave, square wave, pink noise, that sort of thing. But how do you do that? Well, what you're going to use is a USB male-to-male cable. So both ends of the USB cable need to be male. If you're somebody that bought your DM-RTA in a Pro kit, it came with that cable. If you already have a DM-RTA and you want that cable, you could either buy a base kit, which has it included, or you can just go and get yourself a standard USB A-to-A, male-to-male basic cable, okay? They're not the most common thing in the world, but they're certainly easy to find on Amazon or wherever else, okay? So once you have that A-to-A cable, and if you're not familiar with what that looks like, this is USB-A, okay? Traditional, what you think of when you think of USB, that's USB-A. So you need an A-to-A, male-to-male cable. Like I said, it's kind of a goofy looking cable. It's not something that you'd see every day. But what we're gonna do here is, I'm gonna stop screen sharing for just a second here. Oops, let me go back. And what we're gonna do is I'm gonna show you actually how to put the software, put stuff on that thumb drive and use that internal drive. So for those of you that don't know, that drive itself actually internally in this that stores the information is a thumb drive that's in there. So essentially there's a thumb drive inside the DM-RTA, and that thumb drive is what stores the pink noise, the sine wave, square wave info, but it also has some free space. So let me move things around here. And so when you plug in the DM-RTA using that male-to-male cable, you're gonna see it show up as basically like a thumb drive. So you can see here on your screen, there's a little silver box that says DMRTA. If we double click on that, you can see where the test tones and everything are stored inside the DMRTA, all right? Now, on my desktop, I have a folder that says music tracks. If I open that up, I've got, what, 6, 7 songs in there that I use just to demonstrate this. So those are just MP3 files, M4A files, whatever it is that I want to use. You can put FLAC files on there. You can put whatever you want on there, you guys. All I'm going to do is literally drag and drop. So I'm going to take my music tracks folder. I'm going to drag it and drop it to the DMRTA folder. And now when I double click this, let's see here, drag and drop. It's transferring the files. It'll take a second to do it. You can see it coming up there on your screen. Once that's done copying those over, we're going to see it pop up in there as a separate folder. And now every car that you get into, you've got your favorite music tracks with you. So whether those are, you know, whatever, test songs, or they're just demo songs, or whatever they are that you like to use to tune a system or demonstrate to customers, whatever it is that you want to put on there, you guys, you can put whatever you want. There's about, I'll show you in just a second, but there's about 10 to 12 gigs of free space on these. So now if I look at this, I've got those same 7 songs on here. So again, here's my DMRTA. I plugged it in. If I double click that, now I have a folder in here called music tracks. Now if I plug this into an aftermarket or factory head unit, all I would have to do is use the head unit to access those files. I think that's another common thing that a lot of guys don't quite understand, is that the files that you put on the USB portion, or whenever you're using the front USB port on your DMRTA, you are not going to control those files via the software, okay? Now you're basically just using it as a thumb drive. So you're gonna need to hit play or select that file from the aftermarket or factory head unit. So that's gonna be a little bit different than how you do some of the other DMRTA software side of it. So I'm gonna pull up the DMRTA itself and I'll show you what I mean.
While he's pulling that up, there's a few questions.
Sure,
So,
go ahead.
What kind of USB do you need to do that with?
USB male to male, A to A. That's what that cable would be called. Now, if you buy our DMRTA Pro kit, that is going to be included, okay? If you buy the base kit, that cable is also included. If not, that's okay. Go to Amazon and search USB A to A, male to male, or any one of those terms, and you'll find what you're looking for. Let me see if I can hold this up closer to the camera here a little bit for you guys. So this is what we're talking about. This is your traditional USB cable, right? Regular USB A to A, male to male. So you just want both ends of it to look like this, you guys.
Let's see here. Can you pair an audio device, a high-res player example, to the ACBT24 as well to a phone to run the control app? Yes, absolutely. So the ACBT24 is a dual input Bluetooth device. So it is essentially 2 Bluetooth devices in one piece. So what you're going to want to do is pair for streaming, just like you would a set of headphones or anything else like that. And then when you open up your control app on the other device, you would go through and it'll pair that way. So you will essentially be paired 2 times to the one product.
Yeah.
So one is for streaming and one is for the controller or the smart app, where you're taking control and doing tuning, or you're replacing the ACR3 functions in the control app.
Yep, it's 2 different Bluetooth protocols ran at the same time. It's just like how you can pair one phone in, say, a car scenario. You could pair one phone for phone calls and one phone for streaming audio. It's the same idea. With the ACBT24, you can pair one app or device for streaming audio and another one for control, or both at the same time. So it'll basically do both, just like Chris is saying. It's a dual function Bluetooth device. So on your screen, I have DMRTA software pulled up. I just launched the software. I haven't touched anything yet. My DMRTA is just powered on. Okay. Now, one of the cool things on the software is up here in the corner of your screen, you'll see there's a little green dot and it shows 100 up there. That is the battery, and the green light shows that we are connected. If I unplug power to my DMRTA, turn this guy on here. Oh, sorry, I already had this open, you guys. Let me reopen this up here.
Ray had a question on if the streamer is an aptX HD. Yes, it is an aptX HD streamer on there. It will transfer as high as you can do Bluetooth right now.
So this is what it looks like when we first plug in. Sorry about that. So it'll pop up and say hardware is now online. This is what it looks like when we plug in the DMRTA. My DMRTA is already powered on. So that's what you're seeing. When I click OK, now we see up in the top right-hand corner there, it shows 100 and it shows the little green dot. If I plug power back into my DMRTA, you'll see that that 100 will change to a little charge symbol and show that we're charging. In this case, it's already fully charged, so it's not going to really show much, but you get the idea. That'll show the state of the internal battery. If you're not familiar with that, or you didn't know that the DMRTA has an internal battery, it does have a lithium-ion rechargeable battery, lasts about 4 to 5 hours on a single charge. So if we look at the software itself here in front of you, you can see there's 5 tabs up at the top: voltage meter, RTA, SPL, polarity, and oscilloscope. If we see up here in the corner by the AudioControl logo, we already talked about the little green dot and the 100 up there. There's also a little 48V that I just clicked on and made light up. This is an important one. This is what turns on phantom power to your microphone. So if you're using this to do RTA work or you're going to use the microphone for SPL or something like that, you have to turn on that 48V little indicator for all of the AudioControl microphones. What that is that's supplying phantom power to the professional microphones, and it's basically what makes them work. If that's not turned on or not highlighted, your microphone, your RTA, your SPL is not going to work. So keep that one in mind. So one of the things that we'll do is we'll kind of go through these different tabs, and I don't want to spend too much time on any one thing, but I want to give you guys a good rundown of kind of what we have going on with the different software. So within the software, like I said, you've got your 5 tabs up at the top. These are the different functions of the DMRTA. So right now we're looking at the voltage meter. The voltage meter is pretty slick. This can read voltage from literally any of the inputs, okay? So up at the top of the screen here, if I click this little drop-down box, you can see microphone, balanced line, unbalanced line, and speaker. This is where you're telling the DMRTA to look. So if I want to look at unbalanced line and I start playing a sine wave, I can see I've got about a 5-volt signal coming through the unbalanced line input, okay? So if you find a signal in a vehicle and you're not sure if it's a preamp signal, an amplified signal, a deck power signal, what did I just tie into? What did I just find with these speaker leads in this kick panel or whatever it is? Or you could even go to the speaker itself, actually, and find the leads right at the rear deck speaker. If you're not sure if that car has an amplifier or not, you don't want to dig around for it necessarily, you could tap right onto those speaker leads back at the speaker itself and find out just using this feature whether it's amplified, non-amplified, deck power, whatever you want to call it. And it's a pretty quick, easy test to do. So again, in that instance, let's say we were doing what I just talked about, we would just use this drop down and we would choose speaker level input instead of unbalanced line, okay? So now that we've seen that, I'm going to turn off sine wave here. We've got quite a few different features up here where it says test tone. This is where I was talking about some of those internal tones and features that are built into the software. So it says sine wave, pink noise, and square wave. If I pick pink noise, the DMRTA is now putting out pink noise on all of its outputs. So if you look at your DMRTA itself, you'll see we've got 1/4 inch outputs, RCA outputs, digital coax, optical, and USB, okay? So you can put out that pink noise out of any of those outputs coming out of your DMRTA. How do you do it? Take a RCA to headphone jack cable, let's just say, hook it up to your DMRTA's RCA outputs, go to maybe the aux input on a factory radio, and now we're playing pink noise. If that car doesn't have an aux in, great. Use the USB we were just talking about and use the USB drive to play your pink noise instead. One other thing that I'll mention here is you'll notice once I clicked on pink noise, the frequency below it went away. That's because we're obviously not going to change the frequency of pink noise, right? But what we might want to do is change the output level. Over on the right-hand side here, you'll see it says output level. There's 2 different ways to change the output of the DMRTA. You can drag this little slider and you can change the output of it. or on the product itself, there's a physical knob. There is a little black knob down in the corner of the DMRTA. You can turn this knob up or down and watch the software change at the same time. So it's two controls for the same thing. You can do it physically with the knob, or you can do it using the slider on the DMRTA app. It's the same exact thing, okay? So let's turn off the pink noise. If I click sine wave, now we are putting out a 1000 hertz, 1000 hertz test tone coming out of the DMRTA. If you want to change what test tone is being played, it's really, really simple. Same thing. Take this little slider and drag this. Now we're playing an 88 hertz test tone out of the DMRTA. If you want to get something specific, you can also click in this little box where it says 88 hertz, and you can type something in. So let's say I want a 62 hertz test tone. Type in 62 and hit enter. Now I've got a 62 hertz tone. Maybe I want a 2500 hertz tone. Now I've got a 2.5 kilohertz test tone. So really, really easy to use once you understand kind of how it works a little bit. Remember, to do that, you have to click which one you want. If you just start playing with the slider down there and you don't have sine wave up here selected, it's not going to be putting anything out, as you can see by the voltage meter down below, okay? So let's move on to the RTA for a second. When we go to the RTA, a lot of guys look at an RTA and they think of microphone, they think of RTAing acoustic response. You can certainly do that with the DMRTA, of course. We would just take our microphone, which I have here today, a CM20 microphone. That's the one that I'm using to demonstrate today. And you would just plug it into the XLR microphone input on the front of your DMRTA, okay? Now, I'm using a XLR extension cable as well, but this is also kind of a cool little trick. If you don't have a microphone extension cable, or maybe you don't need one for the situation you're working in, you can actually take the microphone itself and plug it straight into the device, just like I've showed you here. And so if maybe you don't need the cable, maybe you're going to strap this whole thing to the headrest of the vehicle, maybe you don't have a cable and you're in a pinch, whatever the question may be, or situation may be, you can plug the mic straight into that. So now that we have the mic plugged straight in and I have the 48 volt turned on up here in the corner, that microphone is now going to be live. So I can go down here, select microphone, and up at the top of the screen, you'll see where it says mic gain. As I bring up the mic gain, you're going to see my voice on the screen, okay? So now we are acoustically measuring the room. You're seeing my voice bounce around on the screen. Of course, there's going to be a little delay since we're doing this through the internet and through Zoom. If you actually see it in real time on the software, it's instant. It's perfect. There's no latency or anything like that. If you're doing it over Bluetooth with the DMRTA, there's of course a little bit of latency because it's Bluetooth, right? So one of the other cool things in the RTA portion of the software is your vertical scale. You'll see down below here my vertical scale. If I want to change this a little bit, now you can see the sound is down a little bit lower there. So if you see something like this on your screen when you're doing measurements and you want to try to make it all fit on the screen, just bring up your vertical scale a little bit so that you can get it to all fit and see an accurate measurement. The other thing that you can do here is over on the right-hand side, it says speed FMS. This is how fast the RTA reacts. So right now it's on fast, which is why it's a little bit sporadic. It's a little bit tweaky. If I go to M, it's going to slow it down a little bit. If I go to S, it's going to be nice and slow, a little bit easier to read, a little bit slower to react. You also have what resolution you want the RTA to be. So I have 1/3, 1/6, and 1/12 octave resolution. So if I go here and I want a little bit more detail, I just clicked 1/6. Now I have a little bit higher resolution RTA. I can go to 1/12, and now I have very fine, detailed resolution on there. One of the really cool things, though, that the RTA does that I think a lot of guys miss is the RTA memory, which is in the middle of the screen. When you click the RTA memory dropdown, you're going to see a bunch of options in here. You'll see that you can store 6 different presets or 6 different memories of the RTA, and you can recall those 6 as well. And then up at the top, you have some options to clear, deselect, and average those memories as well. So let's say while I'm talking, I go in here and I say store number 1. I'm going to hit yes on that. And now if I go into RTA and say recall number 1, You can see how it ghosted it into the background when I stopped talking. I'll just turn down the mic gain here so that you can see it on the screen. So that's what the RTA memories do. They allow you to basically take a quick snapshot of what the RTA sees and ghost it into the background so that you can compare and make your changes to your EQ or whatever changes you're making to that system. Pretty cool stuff. The SPL meter is the next tab over. If we go to SPL, we can also go here, and what we want to do on this is make sure that 48V is also selected, okay, or else that microphone is not going to be active. The important one on this one, you guys, is down here where it says reference mic. You want to make sure that you have the correct mic selected. So in this case, like I said a minute ago, we're using the CM20. If I go in here and tell this has all of the audio control microphones listed. So I'm going to go in and tell it CM20. I'm going to say yes. And now we're going to get an accurate reading of how loud it is in the room or how loud my voice is using that microphone. Now on the side of this as well, you'll see speed again, just like the RTA. I can slow down or speed up how fast this reacts. And I can also click hold so that I have a peak hold in there. So if I get really, really loud, like I just did, now you'll see peak hold. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. The main question we get asked on this portion of the DMRTA is how loud will it read? Well, it'll read as loud as the microphone is capable, basically. So depending on which audio control microphone you have will determine how loud that RTA can read. Moving on to the polarity checker, this is pretty straightforward. It's a really cool feature though, super, super useful when working on a lot of these newer vehicles. You can basically take the output of the DMRTA, feed it into, say, a factory or aftermarket radio, and when we click Start Measurement, it's going to ask us, do we want to proceed? It's going to output some little click, pop, tone noises. If you've never heard what polarity clicks sound like, they're kind of a clicking, popping noise. And now we would take our microphone with the DMRTA, and you're generally going to want to use it on some sort of an extension cable. It's going to be a lot easier that way. Take your microphone on an extension cable like this and hold it up to each speaker. As you hold it up to each speaker, the DMRTA is going to put a big positive or negative in that middle section of the software and show you whether that speaker is correct polarity or not, right? So it's super valuable when you're done doing an install to make sure that everything is done correctly, but it's also valuable on a brand new car that you haven't touched yet just to see which speakers are wired possibly out of phase from the factory. We're starting to see that a lot in a lot of these newer vehicles. The last one I'll pull up here, you guys, is the oscilloscope. The oscilloscope, if you've never used one before, super, super valuable tool for finding max levels, finding where a head unit clips, setting gains, all sorts of different things that you can do with this. And if you want to learn more about that, we did a 1-hour training on just using the DMRTA a few weeks back. So you can find that on Facebook or contact me and I can send it to you directly as well. But the oscilloscope is pretty slick. It's pretty easy as far as the software itself goes. On here we have our time base on the left-hand side. So you'll see 1 or 5. As I click that, you'll see down at the bottom of the screen, we just changed the millisecond denominations at the bottom. So I have from 1 to 10 milliseconds or from 5 to 50 milliseconds, depending on what I want to see on the screen. On the other side of the screen there, you have vertical scale. Same thing. Right now, we are looking at -5 to +5 volts. If I go to 2, we've got -10 to +10, or I've got -25 to +25 volts, right? So depending on what the signal is that you're looking at, you may need to change that so that you can get it all on the screen. I'll give you an example. If I click my sine wave here, and let's bring this down a little bit. Okay, so what I've done is I just took the DMRTA and I looped its output back into its input just for this test so that I can show you what that looks like. I clicked on sine wave. I'm now playing a 74 hertz tone out of the DMRTA, and that's what you're seeing in your oscilloscope. If I bring the output level of this up, we're going to see on the screen, there it is all the way to the top. Now, everybody's looking at that and seeing it flatten out at the top, but if we change our vertical scale, now we can get it all on the screen and see that it's actually not clipping. It was just running off of the screen. So we have done a whole training on just the DMRTA. We could spend the whole training on just the DMRTA, but because we want to talk about the Smart DSP and stuff as well today, we'll move on here in just a second. Was there any DMRTA specific questions, Chris?
Not yet.
Okay,
It looks
cool.
good.
All right.
So one of the reasons we wanted to touch on the DM RTA software was because we obviously want to touch on the RTA. So now we're going to be switching over, and we're going to be sharing with you guys the software for the DM Smart app. Okay, so now we're in the DM Smart app. So you got a chance to see exactly how the RTA looks in the DM RTA. So with this, we're now plugged into a D6-1200. Okay, and so I think, you know, behind us we have our test bench and everything else here. What I am doing is I just have an iPad that I'm running pink noise into this D6-1200 just as a reference, okay? So the very first thing that you're going to want to do when you connect to the software is take a look at your input view. So right now we're on input view, and you can go through and name these or do whatever you need to do. So the very first thing that you're going to see is at the top what you're looking at, okay? Now, we did name these already, but you can rename different things. So somebody asked about the ACBT24 and where it comes in. Well, it depends on the product. So if you have an ACBT24 and you are connected to that for streaming, that is always going to come in on your input view at the very last set of channels. Yep. So if you're on a DM810, it's going to be coming in on 7 and 8. Okay, on the D6-1200, 7 and 8. On the DM608, it's going to be coming in on 5 and 6. Okay, so that's where you're going to want to look to see exactly what you're working with and how you're streaming into it. Okay, because that comes in on those last set of outputs. If you wanted to set up multiple inputs, meaning, hey, I want to connect my OE stereo, and I also want to have a separate setting for the Bluetooth streamer, you can do that, okay? And this alone could take 3 hours to go through all this stuff, and a lot of you guys have never really engaged with this. So the very first thing that we're going to focus on is just one input right now, okay? So like I said, the input that you're looking at right now is right here behind me, not Matthew, but me, and it's just an iPad playing mono pink noise that's looped in, okay? So once you see that you have a full range input right here, you know that you have a good signal, all right? Now, you might want to go through and look at other inputs as well. If you were, say, connecting to a factory system where you had maybe 1 and 2 as a tweeter input. Well, if that was a tweeter input, you would only see, you know, information up here with very little down here, right? And then you could go through and look at 3 and 4. Maybe that's a mid bass, so you would see more reaction here in the RTA. So if you have an input and you see something like this, so you go in at the back of a factory stereo, you connect to it, you're playing pink noise through the system, and you see something like this, you are golden. You have a full range input. Yep. You really don't have to think much further than that than to look at that and go, wow, I have a full range input. I have a lot to work with here. And then you can go through and start manipulating on the outputs. On the input side of stuff, there is an input gain level. And this is where you're going to go ahead and make different adjustments on the input gains. So say you're summing devices, you can make sure that the sum inputs are level on the input side. So maybe on this input, you have an aux input that is going to be completely noise free. Well, you can feel free to turn this up right here and making sure that you have no noise, making sure you have good strong signal into the amplifier or DSP. So this input gain is actually adjusting the input sensitivity going into the processor or the amplifier. And you can see there as I turn that up that we can see exactly what it's doing on the input side. That is affecting the output, but it's a separate thing because there's a ramp up post side of the DSP as well. All right, so now we know we have an input, we know we have full range, and then we can start looking at our outputs. All right, so I am just going to take one of these sides and bring it in, and you can see there that it will resize. People frequently ask, how come I can't see everything on one screen? If you go full screen, you will have to scroll, all right, like that. myself, I like to bring it in so I can see everything that I have going on one screen. This is a brand new software update. So if you look here at the RTA and EQ screen, there is some more stuff on it. We have an RTA memory recall. Matthew showed you in the RTA on there, pulling up some of the presets. And so now if you had a DMRTA and you had a house curve, you could actually import that and then load it into your DSP Smart app now, okay? There is a lot of cool stuff right here in this RTA screen. So let's work through the output summing. This is essentially your mixer, okay? This is where you're going to decide how you're going to populate your outputs. So let's just say we came into the DSP on this input view, we had full range input, and we want to send that to our output, okay? So now we can say right here exactly how we want to mix this output. So say we're doing a tweeter. So we labeled this tweeter. We want to set it up for a tweeter now, okay? So we're doing an active front stage. We know we had full range on one of those inputs, and we want to grab that. So we can just go right here and populate it by saying, hey, I want my tweeters to get signal from my main input, which was 1 and 2, just turn it blue. And look at that. Now it's showing the output side of the DM Smart app. It's showing what's going out of the DSP or what's going out of the amplifier, okay? So this is where you can also do your summing by simply adding more channels. So say you had a factory three-way system and you populated all 3 inputs, tweeter, mid-range, bass, sub. You can go through and just click that. Now it's going to take inputs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 and sum them to that output. All right. So really simple summing device. This throws a lot of people for a loop because this is different than most people look at a lot of DSP. All right. So this is really simple. Now, when you look at this, since we're in output view, now we have a level controller that is only controlling the output or the post side of the DSP. All right, so now when we change this, this is going to actually adjust the output level. So here, when we adjust the level, this is only controlling the input gain for 1 and 2. Here, this is controlling the output of whatever we decide in the mixer. So if we have these two summed together, this is going to take both of those that are summed together and ramp them up or down, okay? So this is not the same as this. This is the combination of whatever you have here in the output view, all right? So really important, do not sum unless you have to. If you have a signal that looks like this, do you need to sum?
No.
Not at all, all right? So this is where you're gonna say exactly how you wanna set it up. So we have full range input, we have a level set here. Now we're calling this a tweeter, so let's say we want this tweeter to play from 3,500 up. And just like that, now we have a 3,500 to 20K tweeter output. So really simple, really easy to use. You can go through and do a lot of stuff, all right? So now we can open up the crossovers. These crossovers are active, so if you're using a D6 1200 or anything like that, this is gonna be active. So you would hear that changing while you're in it, okay?
Yep, all goes in real time, you guys.
Yep. Now, other things that we can see in the software. Right now, our ACR3 level controller is blue, okay? This is also going to work for the ACBT24 when it is plugged in and you are using your control app, okay? So what that means is if I turn level on here and I have an ACR3 plugged in, now it's going to control that output. So now we can change this level through the ACR3 knob by turning it up and down, okay? If you had the control app and you had that on when connected, if you just turn the rotary knob on the app itself, that is also going to make this output turn up and down, okay? So really easy. We can see exactly what we have going out of the DSP or amplifier. One thing to remember that this is an electrical signal. This is not a mic'd signal. This is not what's going on in the actual vehicle. This is electronically what's going out of the DSP. There is going to be room changes and vehicle size changes and stuff like that that happens acoustically. The DM Smart software is where you're going to do everything electronically. All right. So if you see a nice, good, strong signal like this, you know you have what you need. You can go through and work it anyway. So say we wanted to set this up as a three-way, like I said, we can just go here to crossovers, click in 3500. Now we have a tweeter output. Say we wanted to look at our mid-range output 3 and 4, and we want these to play from 90 hertz up to 3500, just like that. Now, oh, why don't we have any movement on our RTA? I just went and changed the crossovers, but what's going on? Well, we can look at our output summing, and I am on the wrong input. I have 3 and 4 input blue, and if I look at the input, I have no signal on the input. So that is not going to do me any good. I need to find out where the signal I'm grabbing on the input of the DSP or amplifier is. It's right there. You click on it. There's your output. All right. So now electronically, what's going out of the DSP and the amplifier is right here. Okay. We have done no EQing, anything else. We got a nice strong signal there. Now you can simply go through, take a tape measure, and enter where everything is. So you don't have to think about the difference between the furthest speaker and the closest speaker. There is stuff built into the Smart app that add latency so that it does a lot of the work for you, okay? If you don't have any Bluetooth issues or anything like that, it's no worries at all. You just simply go through, you can say, hey, my tweeter on the driver's side is 36 inches away, and my tweeter on the other side is 49 inches away. And you can go through and save those. As you're working through each output, it's always good to go through and save your presets, okay? So you do that by taking your mouse, hovering over the number on the preset you want to save, and pressing and holding down the mouse, okay? And that will save. If you're not doing that and you go and bounce around, you can lose stuff, all right? So make sure you're saving after each one of these outputs you work through, okay? Now we can go through and take a look at our mid-range, go through there, and we can say, okay, this is 26 inches, and this is 42 inches, and it goes through and does a lot of that stuff for you, okay? It will go through and think and set it all up. Here, if we wanted to do only the subwoofer as a level control with the ACR or the ACBT24 using the control app, we do not want our tweeters to be controlled through the level controller. So we will not let that be blue. Maybe we want to go through and look at our line output from the amplifier because this is going to a subwoofer. We can set that up really easy and say, hey, I want my, oops, wrong side. I want my subwoofer to play here, okay? Now I have a subwoofer output and I do want it level control. So I'm gonna turn that blue and I'm gonna save that output because now I just worked through and set that up as a subwoofer output.
So keep in mind when you're highlighting those, you guys, on the ACR3, whatever channels have ACR3 remote level highlighted, the ACR3 is going to control that channel's volume. So if you want master volume from your dash control knob, because it's a classic car or something like that, make sure that you go through every single channel like Chris is doing right now and showing you and select that level. If you just want it to be a sub-control knob, which is maybe the more likely situation, then you would just click on whatever channel is controlling the woofer and make sure that that level control is highlighted. When you're looking at the output summing, that's the other one that I get asked a lot about. The easiest way to remember that in my mind, Chris just explained that, the easiest way to me to remember that is when I'm highlighted on the channels like he is right now on 5 to 6 and they say full range, I look at the output summing and say, where do I want my signal to come from? If I just want it to come from 1, 2, great, just make sure 1 to 2 is highlighted. If you need the outputs 5 to 6 to be fed by inputs 1, 2, and 3, 4, then make sure 1, 2, 3, 4 are all highlighted. So just highlight wherever you want the signal to come from for the channel that you're working with. That's the way I remember it.
So as Matthew was just talking about that, I went through and turned on the level for every one of my outputs. So this is the D6-1200. There is built-in 6 channels, and then you have the stereo line output, okay? The blue is on for every one of my outputs. That means that it's going to be using that as a master volume control on the ACR, all right?
It would also be master volume on the DM Control app.
Other things that you're going to want to look at. So right now I'm looking at this, and stuff to pay attention to is on my main tweeter input, I only have 1 and 2. On my mid, I only have 1 and 2. But now on full range, I have 7 and 8 and 1 and 2. Do I want that? No, right? Because we have a full range input. So you want to go through and make sure you're double checking your work and making sure that you're not unnecessarily adding anything, okay? If I left, say, 7 and 8 blue on one of those, and I plugged in the AccuBASS and I started streaming to it, it will mix the stream in with your other signal, okay? So it will actually sum 2 different sources together if you needed to. And that's why we can do like radar chimes and stuff like that through there. If I had radar chimes coming in on 5 and 6, and I wanted those to go through only my mid-range speakers, I could do that. Now it's going to take an additional input from 5 and 6 and sum it in with this output. So it's going to send that signal out on this mid-range input, all right?
Somebody asked, does the delay actually use inches or does it convert to milliseconds? You can change that, like Chris is about to show you up in Tools. You can actually go down to change output delay, and you can change that to whichever denomination you want. So right now it's on centimeters. You can change it again and do it in inches or milliseconds and do it however you want. So now it's at milliseconds.
One of the things that we had early done on, and we talked about building in latency into all the DSPs. You can see here when you change it to milliseconds that it has 21.3 milliseconds built into it, okay? So if you ever do have like a Bluetooth phone that you're talking and there's any kind of delay in there and you need to do a preset, you can simply go to milliseconds and remove all latency out of the DSP. All right, so that's another key feature that you can go through and use to do. Now, most of the time, that's not an issue. Only on a few European cars. There's a couple of Teslas, too, that when you're paired with your phone, you might have some delay in the Bluetooth. All right, and you can just easily set up a preset, take out all latency, and it's good to go.
So somebody had a question, what about using optical in with the Bluetooth on input? What input is used in that situation?
You want to answer that?
How about it? You got the software in front of you.
My brain was somewhere else, so when you're reading the question. So
sorry.
I need to change this. Hold on. All right, change it back to inches.
There you go.
Okay, what was the question?
So what about using optical in with the Bluetooth on input? What input is used for that?
Optical will take precedence. So the AccuBASS is an analog input, all right? And the digital will be the priority. So I don't know the order, but I believe that it's optical priority 1, coax priority 2, and the analog will always be there. You can actually sum in digital and analog onto that single input. So
and that's shared on 7 and 8.
Yes.
Yes.
So you have to be mindful of that as well. So there is a lot of mixing that goes on with this. So you can do a bunch of different stuff. One of the cool things about like the DM810 and the DM608 is the mono input for center channels. So we don't have that really set up here, so I'm not going to show you, but like in my car, you can use the standalone processors to keep an upmix center channel and go through and rework those. You can also create a center channel with it. Though it's not a true upmixer, you can go through and do some really cool stuff. And I've showed guys that before, but that is pretty complex on how to do that in there. So now we went through, we populated our outputs. We have tweeters here, we have mid-range here, and we have a full range output here, and then a subline output here. And we can verify, go through and check all those out. Now we can go through and talk. We talked about the ACR remote level, where we want that lit. So if we only wanted a sub, we're going to go through and not have that blue on all these. and now we have a line output that goes to sub. Here is a little bit of information for you guys, okay? This is how I personally do it. I think it's best. I go through in the DSP and the output. So this is not the integrated amplified section, but the outputs. And I will go through and set this at -20 dB. I do that every single time I do a tune. And the reason I do that is during startup, it is always going to start at that level. So your amplifier pass-through output or your standalone sub output is always going to fire up in that -20 dB on that one channel. And that way, if I get out of the car and I'm just railing on my bass and I get back into the car, it's going to be 20 dB attenuated. And then I have the ability to ramp it back up. It's also good because it gives you some extra headroom, so to speak, on your sub output when you're tuning and setting your gains on the sub output. All right. So now when you get in and that sub amp is tuned at 20 dB, -20 dB on that sub output, you have the ability to ramp up bass as well as turn bass down. So that's just a little trick there that I use when I tune cars myself. And it proves to work out well so that when you're getting in, you're not turning it down, and then you still have the leverage to crank the bass up. All right, so now I go through, I will set up my sub output at -20 dB. I will set that as a preset. No, do not continue. I'm going to go through and set that. Yes, overwrite. And now that sub output is all 20 dB attenuated. Every time I start up, every time I go out of that preset and back into that preset, it's going to be at 20 dB. Now, when I have my ACR controller or I have the ACDT24 control app, I have gain structure on my sub output as well as still plenty of attenuation. All right. So that kind of works through what you can do just in the output summing bar here. You saw the crossovers, you saw the delays. Let's talk about AccuBASS, okay? Now AccuBASS here, when you get it, is going to be all the level down and the threshold all the way down. So right now, AccuBASS, this light is green. That means that AccuBASS is actually on, all right? So at whatever volume I'm at on the source unit, I can go through and ramp up my sub output here. All right, and maybe I don't want to ramp up my sub output. Okay, you can just leave it down. It's not adding anything. All right, now why is AccuBASS engaged? Maybe I'm at a volume where I don't want that AccuBASS bass boost kicked in. I can go through and turn this down, rather all the way up. So now my threshold bar is completely blue. Now AccuBASS has a 10-second delay on it. Okay, so as you saw, I ramped threshold all the way up. My active light turned out after 10 seconds. That means that whatever volume I'm at right now on the source unit, AccuBASS is not going to be engaged. All right, so what I can do is say, hey, I'm at a volume right now where the bass is comfortable. I'm not looking to add boost, but I do know that my factory at this volume will start to take bass away. All you have to do is grab the threshold button and start pulling it down until you see the active light come on. Boom. I just set my AccuBASS threshold so that every time I hit that volume range, now I can add bass boost. So wherever I was on the source unit, I set my AccuBASS threshold, and now I have full control over how much bass I want to add into it from that point on. All right. That kind of shows AccuBASS, or you can simply just turn it blue and bypass it altogether. You know, that might not be a bad thing to do, like on all your mids, you know, mid and tweeter. Just to be sure, you can always just bypass the AccuBASS. All right. So now my sub output has exactly what it needs. It has the frequency response it has. I have AccuBASS set up, so now I can add bass at that volume that the source unit is currently at. All right. So now we can get through, and let's just go back to our mids. We have a nice mid-range signal here. This is where you're going to adjust how much you're looking at on your RTA screen, okay? So this is the electronic signal that's coming out of the processor or amplifier, okay? So here we can go through, and if we make a change here in EQ, we can see that it affects that that channel.
Now, let me just jump in for a second there. Chris mentioned this earlier, but I want to reiterate this because I answer it probably daily, and that is, this is not the acoustic response in the car. You do not plug a microphone into the DSP or the amplifiers. This is the signal coming out of the DSP or the amplifier, electrically speaking, okay? So just to be really, really clear on that, I think a lot of guys just hear RTA and they see RTA and they go, oh, cool, it's measuring what it sounds like in the car. That's not quite the case, right? Because the signal coming out of the DSP or amplifier is going to be different once it goes through an amplifier, through a set of speakers, in an acoustic environment like a car with all of the different materials and glass and reflections and all that sort of stuff. So I just wanted to make that really, really clear because we get asked that almost daily when people just think of think of RTA, I should say.
So we talked about just showing the vertical scale of what we can see here. We also have the fast, medium, and slow. So that gives you the ability to go through that stuff. The RTA Memories is the newest thing. So we can go through and put a house curve on there, okay? So we did build in now with the latest update, you do have our kind of house curve that we do show there, okay? Then we can take it away. We can also start to go through and store memory. So I can store this and then recreate the average on multiple inputs. That's where we're starting to go with this stuff and where we'll start to do more stuff. Here we have flat. This is going to reset all your EQs to flat. So I made a little adjustment there. It's just going to take it. There's also the draw button. This is so you can take your cursor and say, hey, you know what? I don't want any of this stuff. So you can just kind of scroll these down. You know, you can run your mouse this way. It just kind of gives you a little bit of like fun kind of
free form
EQ draw.
Yeah.
You know, so if you wanted your output curve to look flat right at 0 dB, you can kind of go through and do that. You can also just reset it there as you're playing or working through it, trying to do what you need to do. You can also say I go through and I do that, and then I want to bypass the EQ. So you can hear the difference after you go through and do your EQing. All right, so you don't have to go through and adjust all this or go back to flat. You can just go through and say, hey, I want to bypass it, so I hear the difference of the EQing work that I just did. All right, which is a really, really cool feature.
Yeah.
Now, another thing that you can do is go through and click auto. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to look at the signal output, and it's going to go through and start working the EQ on its own to give you a flat response output. Okay, so you can go through and do that a couple times. It'll make the changes for you. I had a big peak here, so it kind of tried to fix that by doing this, automatically on its own. A lot of times for a bass tune, you can go through electronically and just auto select like 3 times in a row.
Yep.
It'll start to smooth out the EQ, give you a flat response output, and then you can go through and just save that. That is a bass tune. Like that is literally, to get to that point, maybe 20 minutes of work in the DSP, and you have a pretty darn good output by the time you go through set crossovers, set the inputs,
yep.
Do your time delay, go through auto EQ a few times. For a lot of customers out there, it's going to be pretty darn good.
Yeah, that's probably 90% of the way there, especially for most production work. What I recommend to a lot of guys is run auto 3 times when you're trying to get a somewhat flat response there, because it's going to make little incremental changes each time. It's not going to make huge drastic changes, but I do find that once you run it 3 times in a row, most guys, by the time it's been ran 3 times, go, wow, that's actually pretty damn good. A question that just came through is on the ACR3 and the Control app, you can only have sub-control or master volume, not both?
No, you can have both.
Right.
So you have 4 presets.
Exactly.
Essentially, you can set these up to do different things. So we can go through and call this a master volume. And then go through, I saved it now. This would be master volume control. I go back through all of my outputs and turn this blue and save it. And now when I'm in preset 1 of the DSP, I have a master volume control. Okay, so I went and set it up. I save it right there. Now I can have that as my master volume control. Now I can go through here and say I want to call this sub control. So I can just go sub control and preset 2. All right. And then I can go in and say, okay, I only want my sub control. I turn that blue. I make sure I don't have silly things going on. And preset that. Now it's only going to be a sub control. All right. So preset 1, master volume control. Preset 2 is only sub control.
Yep.
And I'm doing this really, really fast. So, you know, we're working through all this stuff to try to get people just started on how to use the DSP and what kind of features to do. At that point, you guys, you would have a good, solid platform. If everything that we kind of work through, you know, your crossovers are set, you should be good. Now, here is where you can start doing more specialized equalization. So for that, I'll go back to my mid-range 3-4. I went through, I already had a bass tune set up. Now you can go through and start doing left and right EQing. All right. So from this screen, you would go through, go to 3, go to 4, and start working through some different stuff.
You want to just cover dashboard view real quick before we wrap up? Just show it.
Sure. And then finally here is the dashboard view. This kind of gives you everything that you work through, kind of everything as far as your input, your output, your summing, what you did on each channel. You can expand that. One of the cool things, like even here, that a lot of guys don't realize you can do is if you just want to have, when you're doing your left and right EQing or doing anything like that, you can simply go in here and just have one large screen. If you do your bass tune, and this is how you do it, okay, you want to keep your stereo outputs tied together at first to do a bass tune. Now you want to go through and start to do left and right EQing because you're using a DM RTA to acoustically look at what's going on in the car. This is where you can do it. So you have your bass tune, you can go here. If you make a change here, it does not affect that channel. All right, so this is more for when you start doing acoustic level adjustments in EQ of the 30 bands, and you're using an acoustic RTA to go through and do a final or more in-depth tune.
Yeah, and that's one that I get asked quite a bit is down at the bottom, why does it say 3, 3, 4, and then 4, or 1, 1, 2, and then 2? It's so that you can do split EQ or group the EQ. If you want to EQ channels 1 and 2 at the same time, or in this case on your screen 3 and 4 at the same time, all you've got to do is make sure that it just has 3-4 highlighted. If you're highlighting just the number 1, you are only EQing that channel, okay? So in a lot of installs, you know, you're not going to need to EQ left and right separately or channels separately until you're getting into, like Chris said, some little bit more detailed stuff there. So yeah, so that gives you guys at least a basic overview of kind of all of the different softwares from us. We try to keep these things at right around an hour. We're at about an hour and a half at this point, so I think we'll start to wrap things up. Unless you have anything else you wanted to cover, Chris?
No, I mean, some of the other things that you guys can do is make sure. So somebody said that they have like some floor noise on an input, you know, or something like that. Well, on all of the amplifiers, DSPs, there are high level and low level inputs, okay? If you have your input all the way up here and you have a factory system, chances are you're going to be amplifying whatever noise is in that system, all right? So there are some really cool things that you can go through and do to get rid of that noise. It's always best to try to get this as low as possible. So you want to make sure first off that you're choosing the correct input for whatever system you have. If you have a factory system that is a non-amplified and has low sub 10 volts outputs on the speaker, you're going to want to go ahead and pigtail those into the amplifier or DSP, and then you're going to turn this down. A lot of cars, I try to be at -9 on the input, okay? That's going to mean we're taking and we're not ramping up the whatever we're getting. We're just trying to get the cleanest signal from that as possible, and then we can ramp it up on the output side here.
And so what Chris is talking about, you guys, with that, if you didn't catch that, was if your high level signal is low enough voltage feed it into the RCA inputs rather than the speaker level inputs. So if you didn't quite catch that, what he's saying is maybe it's a car that's just head unit power. It's not amplified or outboard amplified or premium sound. If it's a system like that and it's just kind of weak factory signal, you will get a much cleaner sound with more output by going into the RCA level inputs rather than the high level inputs. Because when you're feeding that signal into the high level inputs, what a high level input does is kind of pad that input down. And if the signal's already weak, we don't want to pad it down just to jack it back up again. That's where we're going to get some noise and stuff like that. So just to be totally clear on that.
Yeah, so there's still a lot more stuff here. Obviously, we're just trying to get to the basics of it and show you some of the ins and outs so that you can have some success. Now, anytime we talk about software, I just wanted to reiterate that, you know, I made the mistake several years ago of saying that, oh, this is really simple. And the very first time you look at any user interface, it is not simple.
Right.
But you have to get comfortable with it and you have to work through it so that you can do this effectively. All right. It's not going to happen overnight. Do I believe that this is one of the simplest softwares of all time for audio integration? Absolutely.
I sure do.
There's plenty of other people in the industry who have looked at this and said, wow, this is really cool. How the software and the firmware are built in together is really cool. It does make it easy. There are times where you're not going to be able to connect with the ACBT24. It is a software firmware. If you are in the app, okay, so if you are hardwired into the app and you go through and you make changes, okay, so say I go through on this one and I make this EQ change and then I save it, and then I move around, I go to a different input or your time alignment isn't saving or something like that, you have a software firmware that is not up to date with each other. So a lot of times you might find that the software firmware does something glitchy. It's because you might be off one revision and it's not taking what you're doing in the user interface and writing it, okay? If you feel like it does that and it does not prompt you when you're doing your startup, here is how you go through and do your firmware updates.
This is important. Pay attention, you guys.
So whatever I have on my computer right now is going to be what I'm going to write on the DSP. So we're going to go to Tools, okay? We're going to go right down here to Update Device Firmware, okay? It's going to open up a bunch of stuff, and I'm just going to go right all the way out to the very beginning, okay? So if you want to go through and do an update, you want to use this arrow button to get to this PC, all right? You're going to click on that. In your hard drive, which is your C drive here, you're going to double click on that. Program Files x86, double click on that. DM Smart App, Data, and then here is your list of tiva.bin files, okay? I have a lot of them because I play with a lot of different software firmware levels.
You won't have this many to choose from.
You are not going to have this many. If you have this many, stop what you're doing, disconnect, and delete DM Smart from your computer, okay? So you're going to go through and update it from the website, get the latest revision, and you're going to go through and say, okay, I want to update it. That is where you're going to find it. It's a tiva.bin file.
And look at the bin file. The model number of the product you're updating is what you're looking for. So in this case, we're talking about a D6-1200. Make sure that you choose the file for a D6-1200.
All right, so that is the key right there, you guys. So that's the last minute here. We're an hour and a half into this, but this last minute is really important. So as you guys are talking about, hey, my ACBT24 won't connect, or hey, my time alignment is not saving when I press and click and hold down. I jump from one preset to another and it's not saved. It all has to do with software and firmware. So let's make sure we're updating that stuff, making sure that it all coincides with each other, and you will not have any of those kind of issues that you might have experienced. So I think that's kind of what we wanted to cover. We went a long time.
Yeah.
We shared our emails here, you guys. So lots, there's a couple thousand people out there that have this software, whether they know it or not, consumers, anything like that. We are here for you guys. Our tech support is here for you guys. We don't like the fact that there's some of you guys that might not be experiencing the full benefit. So let's make sure we update. Let's make sure that we're using the correct software firmware package, getting the latest. Somebody asked about Maestro AR. Yes, we are still working on that. We have it to enter Maestro mode. That will be a whole separate web training when we get to that point. We can go through and talk about that more later, but I wanted to say thank you. This is something that we've wanted to do for a long time. We're super stoked that there's a lot of you guys on here.
Yeah.
We are available. So
yeah, a couple of things before we wrap up too. One of the questions was stacking the BT24 with the Maestro. It's the same port, so you wouldn't stack them. Chances are, if you're using Maestro though, you're using it because you're working on a newer vehicle, and chances are that newer vehicle has Bluetooth, right? I mean, that's generally where that's going to be used. So to answer that question, it would be one or the other. One other thing too is I would say the best thing that you can do with like Smart DSP, you guys, is play with it. You're not going to mess anything up. You're not going to ruin anything by messing around with it. Okay, if you have any of these products in your store or in your car or in your home or whatever, try them out, play with it, hook up to it and mess around with it, hook up a test speaker if you can, whatever it is. It's the number one thing you could do to figure this stuff out. I mean, we can do training after training after training on these things, but unless you are either following along with the software on your own computer, like we talked about, or have this at home to play with, it's going to be tough to get it until you actually dive into it. Once you get into it and maybe you put in your first one or you spend a couple hours messing with it, it's really pretty straightforward. It's not nearly as complicated as I think a lot of guys make it out to be.